Hi, I'm Micah Woods, here this morning on a beautiful day in Corvallis, Oregon, with Tom Cook, who was my professor at Oregon State University when I studied about turfgrass there many years ago. And we're going to have a look at his lawn, which has some really interesting maintenance, and it's surprising what type of turf conditions he can get without doing too much work. Let's have a talk about this, Tom, shall we?
Sure. Well, we're in front of the house here, and this is kind of my experimental lawn. The original lawn goes back to about 1960, so I'm guessing at that point in time it would have been planted with Kentucky bluegrass, some fine fescue, and possibly highland bentgrass, which today we call dryland bentgrass. And those three grasses would have been what they started with. It may have been overseeded before we bought the house in 1984. But my guess is it probably didn't have much done to it. So basically what we've got now is a predominantly bentgrass lawn, and most of that bentgrass is highland bentgrass. And it also contains Poa trivialis and annual bluegrass and velvet grass, Holcus lanatus. And then I can still find Kentucky bluegrass at times. I have in the past found a few clumps of tall fescue, but I roved those out because it's a pretty unattractive grass. So what we got here is a lawn that the folks in New Zealand would say is at equilibrium, and it's predominantly bent grass. In the fall and winter, the Poa trivialis takes off and starts to dominate a little bit in the winter. In the spring, we see some annual bluegrass, and then of course the Holcus lanatus, or the velvet grass, is pretty much consistent with the bentgrass in terms of its seasons.
Is that the Holcus lanatus?
Yeah, this is the Holcus lanatus right here, and it's a coarser textured grass, but it's one of the naturalized grasses that does extremely well under conditions of low input. It has pretty good drought tolerance. It has a low fertility requirement, and so it's very compatible with bentgrass under those circumstances. So what you're looking at is a typical spring lawn. I haven't fertilized this lawn or with any products for over 15 years.
15 years?
Yeah, but the one thing I did do was that about 15 years ago, is I dethatched it severely and overseeded with Fresa strawberry clover. And then since then, I have periodically overseeded, doing nothing more than spreading seed with white clover, since Fresa is no longer available. So I attribute the density and the general good color of the turf to the nitrogen that's fixed by the clover nodules, and leaves us with a pretty easily maintained lawn as far as fertility goes. And then of course, keeping in mind that bentgrass has a very low fertility requirement, and other grasses wouldn't hold up as well, I'm sure.
And is this the white clover that we see here?
This is strawberry clover. It has a longer, narrower leaf than white clover.
Oh, I'm going to zoom up on that. That's
yeah, it's quite stoloniferous, and it competes well with the grass. An interesting phenomena that has occurred is that over time, as the more nitrogen becomes available to the grass, then the grass becomes denser and thicker, and then that begins to outcompete the clover. So there's sort of this shift that goes back and forth. And so that's why I periodically overseed with white clover, and I don't use any of the fancy varieties. I just use common white clover, and that way I can maintain a constant uniform population of clover, which helps with the grass. So yeah, so this is this is about as low maintenance as you can get. I irrigate, but my basic goal is to keep it more green than brown in the summer. And of course, we get very dry summers here. We'll go 4 months without significant irrigation or with rainfall, and so my goal is to irrigate 4 to 5 times a year. In a bad year, I'll irrigate 8 times, and in a good year, I can get by with 3. Just depends on the timeliness of summer storms, that sort of thing. But I've been able to reduce the irrigation input probably by 50 to 60% over what I used to do, which was irrigate weekly through the season. So you've got that. I mow weekly, and I try to mow weekly. It's been a little tough in the last couple of weeks.
And it's growing with no fertilizer again.
No fertilizer. This has never seen any
for 15
inorganic
years.
or synthetic fertilizer in the last 15 years. Before that, when I did fertilize, I used ammonium sulfate, perfect for bentgrass and of course for Hocosonatas too. So yeah, it works, and it works because these grasses are particularly well adapted to low fertility sites. Our soil test over the years, phosphorus runs about 9 parts per million. We've got the potassium down to about 100 parts per million, which is low by normal soil test standards in the Northwest. Both of those are in that range that the bentgrass can tolerate extremely well.
And you return the clippings, I suppose?
I return the clippings. I normally in the summer mow with a regular old push reel mower, and I just let the clippings fly. Last year I bought an electric lawnmower to see how they would work, and I use that in the fall and the spring when there's a lot of litter on the ground. So this year I've just mowed it with the electric rotary mower, but I always return clippings, and it works.
Well, cool. We talked on the ATC office hours last year about your lawn and about grass in the Pacific Northwest. And I remember you said you have some Bermuda grass somewhere. And would it be possible for us to go have a look at that?
It would. I want to show you one interesting facet of lawn culture in the Northwest. It shows up in this parking strip. This is non-irrigated. I don't water it at all. And so what happens is you start to get species shifts. And one of them is this real fine texture grass, looks like fine fescue, and it is. It's Vulpea myuros, which is a winter annual fine fescue. So it germinates in the fall, grows through the winter. It'll flower sometime in May and early June, and then it just dies, turns brown. And then along with that, you've got subterranean clover, which is a winter annual clover. So what happens in these lawns that are not irrigated at all is that some of the bentgrass, in this case the dryland bentgrass, survives, and then as the turf continues to thin out over time, just due to the severe drought period, then we shift into a cycle that's suitable for these winter annuals. So we've got the winter annual grass, and then we've got the winter annual subterranean clover, and then they mix with the remnants of the highland bentgrass. And so we're still able to maintain a pretty functional lawn until we get to the peak of the summer drought. And then, of course, everything turns brown.
So behind you here on your front lawn, this is irrigated, and it maintains more density, and the bentgrass.
And the bentgrass dominates completely.
Dominates.
You won't find any Vulpea myuros, and it's only 4 feet away from an area that's becoming increasingly dominated by the Vulpea. So, as you look around, you go for walks and look around town, parking strips, areas, the longer they've been unirrigated, which now for some areas is 15, 20 years, the more they become dominated by the Vulpea myuros.
So what about those dandelions over there? Why is that dandelion or false dandelion?
Yeah, that's a combination. Right now you're seeing common dandelion, the Taraxacum.
And is that just because this is not mown as frequently, or is there something different to cause it here?
The mowing frequency is there's such a long period between mowings that it actually allows it to flower and then produce seed. And on this side, I've kind of had a project where the question is, could you maintain a lawn weed-free, quote, dandelions or false dandelion, without using herbicides? And so I manually dig these out, and my general strategy is about 5 to 10 minutes after I finish mowing, I just go dig up a few plants. And except for the border areas that are right on the edge, I've been pretty good about keeping it weed-free enough that it looks like a weed-free lawn. It's not, but it looks like it. And so an interesting thing too is that I've never had English daisy in the lawn, but that's perfectly suited to a non-irrigated site. And it grows well in the winter, flowers early in the spring. You know, it starts flowering in as early as January, it reaches a peak in March, and if it was a sunny day today, these would be in full bloom. But I developed this one patch about 2 years ago, right there, and you can see how it's starting to move out. So we're getting some dispersion from the seed, but it also produces rhizomes, and it's perfectly suited to a non-irrigated site. So if we went up a couple blocks away to Jefferson School, which is a school lawn that's not irrigated at all, right now it would look like 90% English daisy.
So you expect this in the non-irrigated portion of your lawn to eventually spread?
Yeah,
and
it'll
be
continue
more...
to spread until I get the words that I better get rid of it. So I'm having fun watching that and see how it actually moves. But again, it's a combination of rhizomes and then seed dispersal. So any plant that's got that ability to spread into these sites, in these niches, if you will become a dominant component.
Cool. Well, should we go have a look at the Bermuda grass? We've come into the backyard, and Tom's going to show us where he's had some Bermuda grass spreading through the lawn and show the extent of this.
So what I've done is as I travel around the Northwest, particularly on the west side of the Cascades, not an area that you would normally expect to find Bermuda grass. It's all over the place. I found it in Seattle. I found it, of course, throughout the Willamette Valley and in southern Oregon. And it's suited to this dry, hot summer period, and it survives through the wet winters. And so what I did was I plugged in some samples that I had taken up in Seattle from Beacon Hill area, just south of downtown. And it's a common type, Synodon dactylon, and but it's a very nice textured grass. So I plugged it in here just to see if it could compete with the cool season grasses. So what happens is, of course, in the wintertime, it goes dormant and it disappears. And you can find a little bit on the edges here, and you can see some of the dormant areas there. But what will happen as we move into summer is the cool season grasses will go dormant, or in the case of the Volpia that's in here, they'll die back. And then the Bermuda grass will come on strong. So by July and August, when everything else is pretty much brown, we'll have this green Bermuda grass. It's actually fairly compatible in that cycle.
It mixes in really well with the bent grass.
Yeah, the color characteristics are almost identical to the bent grass. This is an interesting lawn because this is the only lawn that I actually planted here, and I planted it with ryegrass and hard fescue, and that would be probably about 15, 20 years ago. And we got a good stand, it looked really nice, and then you can see the transition that has occurred to virtually the same thing that we have in the front yard with predominantly highland type bent grass, Poa trivialis, some velvet grass, and a little bit of annual bluegrass. So in a short period of time it's done that, and of course the sources of all these indigenous types or these naturalized grasses is coming from the soil seed bank. So this area is so well suited to those grasses that over the years the seed bank has developed. And I'll show you an area over here which is kind of an interesting variation. So this main panel of lawn has sort of self-segregated. If you get up towards the house, where it would be the hottest, driest area because it's higher, there's about a 4-foot slope there, that's predominantly dryland bent grass. So it's got the rhizome system to survive under hotter, drier conditions. Then you can see some light colored patches of clones of velvet grass. So some of those are now 6-7 feet in diameter, all have started from a single seedling that has tillered and spread. And then as you get down here to this lower portion, which tends to be wetter, that's predominantly creeping bent grass. And so it's perfectly well suited in that site. And so what I find as I look at lawns, if they're consistently irrigated, you'll often see a lot of creeping bent grass. If they're marginally irrigated, then you'll see a lot of dryland bentgrass. We don't see a whole lot of colonial bentgrass. It's here, but we don't see a lot of it because it was never really planted very much. So to the extent that it was planted, you'll find it. And then along the edge of the lawn there, where I keep it, clean, free of weeds and stuff, the three grasses that consistently come up would be creeping bentgrass from the seed bank. We'll get Poa trivialis and then Poa annua. So, and occasionally I'll see colonial types or highland types come up, but mostly what I see are the creepers.
And you did have some zoysia back here, and it
did
not persist. Can you show me where that was?
Yeah, I'll show you where it was. It was right about here.
Right.
And it survived for a couple years. I kept it cleaned out around the patch, and then eventually, as the highland bentgrass moved back in, the zoysia couldn't compete, and then it doesn't do that well under severe drought, as you had told me a number of years ago when we talked about this. And
it really only grows when it gets really, really hot.
Yeah, and
so it would just sit there and not spread, I imagine.
Yeah, somehow, if I have found a zoysia grass lawn in town, and it's a perfect situation. It's on a sloping lawn, south-facing, hot as blazes, and they got a good start initially, and it's about 80% zoysia grass. It's the only lawn I've found in town that I've seen clumps of zoysia, but I've never found a dense turf. So it's not a good fit, not nearly as good as Bermuda grass. I can find a fair number of Bermuda grass, naturalized Bermuda grass lawns that have done really well.
And so, if we go down to southern Oregon, I imagine like Medford or...
You get down to Medford.
It would be, Bermuda grass would be even better, wouldn't it?
Yeah, at Rogue Valley Country Club there's large masses of Bermuda grass that have developed, and it would be really well suited to that climate.
I've heard there's even some Bermuda grass at the Bandon Dunes Golf Resort.
There is, and I've got samples. Actually, I collect these things.
So do I.
So, these are all. I cut them back really hard in the winter. So this one came. This is the one from Beacon Hill in Seattle.
That's a wild Bermuda grass from Seattle, Washington.
Yeah, and the last place I would ever have expected to see it. I noticed it in the summer. We were going for a walk, and I just happened to glance at this lawn, and you can see the seed heads, and so it seeds prolifically, and that's probably the basic source of contamination. But I could find this, and I could probably find Bermuda grass in Corvallis in about as much as 20% of the lawns that I look at. And of course you find it in weird places like cracks in sidewalks and so forth. And then this is that paspalum that you had helped me identify years ago, Paspalum disticum, which also grows here. It's pretty rare, but it's you can find it. And it was first identified here way back in the early 1900s by a local teacher up in Salem. But I don't see it a lot here, but I do find it periodically. And then I've got my...
That looks like zoysia.
Yeah, this is Meyer's. I'm assuming it's Meyer zoysia. This is from that lawn that I told you about. And this is what I propagated and planted in this lawn without success.
So if it's kept on its own, it can persist, yes. But it just did not compete in a lawn
it did not compete.
Situation.
Yeah, and it, again, it would need regular irrigation in the summer. The one period of time when it can grow, so you'd have to push it in the summer. It doesn't have a very good fit here.
Yeah.
So, and then I've got samples from Walla Walla in Washington, down in the hot zone there. I've got samples throughout Eugene Country Club. You name it. Even where I go, I can find these things. I plug them out, and they grow pretty well.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Tom, for this tour of the lawn.
Yes.
And I think if anybody's interested in this kind of stuff, search the Asian turfgrass website for ecology, and you'll find some articles and links to these type of topics. This is something that Tom taught me about 25 years ago, 28 years ago when I was at Oregon State University. and it's something that I love to do, looking at lawns around the world and what's growing, and I continue learning from you. Thanks so much for all you've taught me and what you've shared with me today.
Yeah, thank you.